Hey, it's me, and welcome to this webcast. Jonathan Foust here. It is cold and rainy here in New England, hence the two layers of wool that I am wearing. I wanted to offer a short introduction to this following talk. This is part three in the series on Am I Dreaming? Thoughts on Thinking. One of the most liberating elements of practice is taking a deep look at the thought process. When you begin to recognize that thoughts, which are repeatedly thought again and again, calcify into beliefs, you can start to deconstruct those beliefs. That's the nature of the following talk, and I hope you find it helpful. It's a really critical element of practice for me. So, before we do that, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to our esteemed producer, Glenn Harrison, for technologically getting this out to you. A big thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader. You can get a link for her 6:30 class on Zoom or it's on my website or on my Facebook page. I got a newsletter. This is all offered freely. Thank you for supporting me. And here we go. Enjoy the following. I let out any sounds. See if you can freak out your cat or your dog or any humans living nearby. Then, as you're ready, you might close your eyes and just take a few moments to let your body sway a little bit to the left and right. And as you just begin to bring in more of this proprioceptive feeling awareness, just notice where the midline is, where you might naturally come to rest. You might find it helpful to shift your attention to your breathing, and we'll do just a few minutes of conscious breathing. Inhaling to the count of 4, and then exhaling to the count of 4. Inhaling to the count of 4, and then exhaling to the count of 4. For the next few minutes, let all of your attention come into your breathing. And the idea here is to match the length of the in-breath with the length of the out-breath. You'll notice this is a concentration technique, and your mind will wander, it'll lose count. Just begin again. You might want to change your ratio a little bit. If you're feeling more and more relaxed, you might maybe count to 5 or maybe even to 6. And as you breathe, you may notice that it's heightening awareness of sensation. How much more can you feel as you also sharpen your attention to the counting? Now, for the next 3 rounds of breath, how much more intimately can you experience the breath on the inside? If you're finding this helpful, you might continue with this technique, or you might just let it fall away and let your breath be utterly free-flowing and effortless. Now, as you notice where you feel the breath. You might direct your attention to perhaps the nostrils or the belly. These are kind of the classical places to focus your attention. The movement of the breath at the nostrils, or the rising and falling of the belly. And you may notice that when you are absorbed into the experience of the breath, there's not a lot of room for thinking. When you lose your connection to the breath, the mind is, shall we say, off to the races. So you might explore some of the following techniques with the attention on the breath. If your mind is particularly active, and you might try this now, count each inhalation up to 5. At the top of the inhalation, counting 1. The next inhalation, 2. And continuing from 1 to 5. Just notice the effect. You may find that this technique helps you to sustain attention on your breath. Another technique, a little bit more subtle, which you might explore now, is to bring your attention to your anchor, to the nostrils or the belly, and notice how intimately you can experience it on the inside. Yet another technique you might explore. This one's quite subtle. Is this inhalation shorter or longer than the inhalation preceding it? Is this inhalation shorter or longer than the inhalation preceding it? As you continue, you might explore any one of these 3 techniques as a way to help you come again and again back to the here and now. And of course, if these don't resonate for you, continue with the techniques that do work and are helpful for you. With these remaining minutes, you might explore now softening your focus on the breath and notice, if you can, the sense of foreground and background. And the foreground is the breath. Is it possible to relax and widen your attention and also notice the background? Everything that is changing. And here you may feel this reinforcement of what some call the witness or the observer. Noticing what is changing. And in these remaining minutes, you might explore what it's like to relax or soften even more. And you might, if you like, let the anchor fall away and explore what it means to simply rest in presence. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, just simply to be. Noticing what arises, what changes, and cultivating a sense of spaciousness and open awareness. Is there anything right now that could relax or soften or let go?
I'm relaxed. Don't I seem relaxed to you? Huh? Don't I?
Deepening your breath. Let your body move and stretch in any way that feels good for you. Reaching your arms up, you can open your eyes and just sense what may have shifted for you over the last 15 minutes. I'm not sure if you heard Siri jump in saying, I'm relaxed, what about you? Oh my. A guy walks into a psychologist's office. And the psychologist says, so, well, welcome. Tell me about yourself. The man says, it's my deeply held belief that I am, in fact, a moth. Well, the psychologist is a little surprised, but he's a professional. So he thinks for a moment and he says, well, I'm sure I can help you overcome that. And the man indignantly says, no way. I love being a moth. Thank you very much. The psychologist says, well, then why on earth did you even come in here? The guy says, well, I was passing by, I saw the light on. Apologies. This talk is about thoughts, but in particular, what I think of as calcified thoughts, which become beliefs. This guy believed he was a moth and he was okay with it. But the question is, what do you believe about yourself that you may not be okay with? And what are you believing about yourself and your life that may not be true? Over the last couple talks, we've been exploring thoughts and how to disrupt a narrative. And there are wonderful techniques, and we'll touch on them briefly here. But it's interesting to notice how the thoughts that you think about 1,000 times calcify into beliefs. How do we work with those? So, what I'd like to explore with you, first of all, where do thoughts and beliefs come from? Second, a little bit on the art of interrupting the stream of thinking, the identification with the thinking process, and then the art of deconstructing beliefs. And it really is an art and science of looking closely at your beliefs and systematically and rigorously exploring whether they are true or not. But along those lines, also a couple words of caution about the power of deconstructing reality as you know it. An element that can be really helpful. Another element of this can be, shall we say, a little disturbing. So life happens and we react. Not that long ago, I was getting ready for a flight. And I noticed I went through this process. When I'm traveling alone, I become a little bit more kind of self-aware of my process. And I noticed I arrived early. I felt good about that. And I noticed as soon as I walked in the door that the airport in Dulles was really crowded. There were a lot of really upset people around me. There were staff that were really harried. And I was like, ooh, this is bad. And as I walked toward TSA, I thought, I got pre-check. This is good. But then I noticed there's a long line, and the line looks longer than the non-pre-check. That's bad. Then I remember that I traveled with just one bag, and I thought, this is good. I'm kind of proud of myself. And as I was admiring my bag, I realized I forgot to empty my water bottle. Oh, well, that was bad. As I'm standing there, the guy going through the scanner forgot to empty his pockets. He had to go back. It slowed down the line. That was bad. But then the next woman, she was really efficient, and that was good. So when it became my turn, I smiled at the TSA agent, and they didn't smile back. That was bad. But then she apologized for the computer running slow. That's good. But while I was waiting, my phone went to sleep, so I had to turn it back on again, which is bad. And you can imagine, I'll stop myself there. There's an interesting thing, and maybe you've noticed this constant play of pleasant and unpleasant. And if you really pay attention, you may notice that you are reacting all the time. You get an email, it feels good. You get another email, feels bad. You get a phone call, ooh, this is great. Another phone call, this is bad. This is a very, very critical thing to pay attention to. In Pali, it's referred to as Vedana, or the feeling tone. And reality is, you've got this body. The body is reacting all the time. And there are three basic feelings we have. Fundamental feelings. There are the feelings that are good. There are the feelings that are bad or unpleasant. And then there are the feelings in between, the neutral feelings. When we don't examine our relationship to that level, that stream of Vedana, of feeling tone, we find ourselves unconsciously trying to hang on to the good stuff and get more and strategize and sustain it. We find ourselves unconsciously moving away from the unpleasant, trying to avoid it at all cost. And when things get neutral, we get bored, which can be pretty destructive. So I love this sort of chain of causality, how thoughts arise. You could say that the most fundamental plane of existence is what we could just call energy, kind of undifferentiated energy. It's life force. It's the Holy Spirit. It's chi. It's ki. It's the experience of aliveness. The difference between you and a corpse is that animus. Now, what happens is something happens, and then you feel it energetically, and without you knowing it, generally, it will register as a feeling tone. It'll register as pleasant, I like it; unpleasant, I don't like it; neutral, I'm bored or I don't notice. And again, without you even noticing it, you'll move into a thought, some kind of a thought structure, some kind of a story. Oh, this is so good. I wonder if I can keep this going. This reminds me of that time when I did this, XYZ, etc., etc. So we have our thoughts are based on feeling tone. We're responding to our environment. Now, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, if you think that same thought over and over and over and over and over again, it will calcify into a belief. I don't like the smell of tuna. Okay, that's a belief. Tuna is bad. If you're not aware of the beliefs in your life, they will form your habits. You live your life in total reaction to that essential feeling tone. If you're not aware of the habits in your life, they form your character. And if you're not aware of your character and your character structure, well, that becomes your destiny. So in this practice, when we come back again and again to the raw experience of the breath or sound or whatever your somatic anchor might be, you are coming right back to the fundamentals. Coming right back to the fundamentals. So anytime, let's just say take one breath right now. For a moment, you've severed your thought process and re-engaged into the here and now. Pretty simple. Of course, what happens is we forget all the time, and then we get lost in a train of thought, into a train of belief, and we set in motion our habits, our character, and we create our destiny. If there's any mistake, the mistake might be believing everything we think. And perhaps failing to examine our beliefs. I can't tell you how many times I've been on retreat and suddenly I realize, oh, I don't have to believe every thought. It's so liberating, so liberating. So we have entertained a lot of beliefs as a species that we now know are bogus. Geocentrism. We thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Copernicus and then later Galileo came along, blew that one out of the water. And many ancient civilizations believed the Earth was flat. But this was debunked by scientific evidence and exploration. Something called spontaneous generation. This was kind of new to me, but for a long, long time, it was once believed that living organisms could spontaneously generate out of non-living matter. Louis Pasteur blew that one out of the water. Phrenology was really, really big. This belief that personality traits and mental abilities could be determined by the shape of your skull. Well, modern science blew that one out of the water. Alchemy. Alchemy was all about transforming base metals into metals like gold and discovering the elixir of life, and that got blown out of the water by modern chemistry. It kind of goes on and on. There's a miasma theory. This was new to me. The belief that diseases were caused by bad air or foul odors. In the 19th century, germ theory blew that out of the water. The whole idea of a static state universe. Before the Big Bang theory was accepted, many people believed that the universe was unchanging. Radically changed. So here are these widely held beliefs that are no longer true. And there are people who were tortured and died because they didn't believe those beliefs or they espoused something different. Which of course brings them to mind. If we one time swore those things were true and they're not now, what are we believing now that years from now we'll look back and just shake our heads at our lack of understanding? And what beliefs are you hanging on to that may not be true? And this becomes an interesting jumping off point to kind of explore how we create our world and how we might deconstruct our world. At some point in our development, we develop a sense of I and mine. In the womb, womb service, everything is taken care of for you. So from 0 to 6 months, infants start to differentiate between their bodies and their environment. They recognize they have hands and their feet, but they don't understand their reflection. They don't get their reflection. 18 to 24 months, they begin to recognize themselves in the mirror. They recognize themselves as separate from others. They might touch their own nose when they look in the mirror. Sense of I and mine starting to get a little bit more structured. Between 2 and 3 years, they become aware of personal pronouns. I, me, and mine. And they start to see themselves as a distinct individual in the world. From 3 to 5 years, there's a much more advanced sense of self and others. They begin to recognize that other people have their own thoughts and feelings and their own perspectives. And they start to develop kind of what's been called the theory of mind. They recognize themselves as thinking and feeling in relationship to other people who think and feel. So this sense of thinking as in a form of self-referencing kind of locks us in for the rest of our lives. And the rest of our life is about preserving this sense of I and mine. It becomes central. And in essence, when you're walking down the street, you are in a cloud of thinking. It's a narrative that continues to remind you that you are a separate self making your way through this three-dimensional world. So thinking is part of the self. I remember talking with someone who was very excited about their little girl, and they said, look, she knows her name now. And I just thought, don't do it. Don't do it. Go back. This is the beginning of the end. I and mine's going to lock in, and then you're stuck. But not necessarily stuck, because you can actually learn to witness this thinking process. When you begin to recognize that you are not just your thoughts, but the awareness of your thoughts, something quite magical begins. And so we have these techniques that help you to break that trance of thinking and reinforce who you are as the awareness of that thinking. Focus body awareness, anchoring in the senses, body scan, the practice of labeling or noting, of just naming what you're the fact that you're thinking, or kind of saying hello to whatever your experience may be. Who is it? What is it that's saying hello? In essence, the practice of Vipassana or mindfulness meditation is to train your attention to rest in the body, to come back to this breath, to these sound vibrations. And you begin to notice something that's in Pali referred to as papancha, or the proliferation of thinking. You'll notice how one thought triggers another thought, which triggers another thought. This awareness of the power of the sensations of the here and now becomes really, really critical. And again, so simple, just not easy. So there are different ways you can train your attention. Just a little bit of a digression here. training yourselves to be intimately in the senses. So as I breathe in, I'm aware of breathing in. As I breathe out, I'm aware of breathing out. Doing washing dishes meditation, doing taking a shower meditation. Every time you're absorbed into the here and now, that calcified sense of I and mind doesn't get quite so calcified. I just want to name another practice. And this is really kind of popularized by a teacher by the name of U Tejaniya, which is actually to pay attention to that experience of Vedana. And when you do a retreat with him, I have not, but I have heard. Over the course of that retreat, you are not instructed how long to sit or what to do in your practice, but 24/7. Notice the feeling tone of your body. Notice how stimulation will either arise from the outside or stimulation from the inside, a thought, a feeling, an emotion, and pay close attention to that play of expansion, I like this, contraction, I don't like this, or that neutral place of boredom. It's a very powerful practice that can lead to some amazing insights. When we don't pay attention, we drift into thinking that we are our thoughts. Now, one of the magical things that starts to develop when you practice is you start to become aware of awareness itself, that there's something that is aware. When I sort of came through this in my depth practice of yoga years ago, we described it as the witness, taking the seat of the witness. This place of the witness is the observer, kind of an unblinking eye that's just simply aware of what's happening, without comment, without judgment. Also described as the observer, sometimes described as mindfulness itself. And translation for mindfulness, how the translation I like is non-judging awareness, a quality of non-judging awareness. When you take that seat of the witness and you practice non-judging awareness, it helps you enormously with breaking your identification with the thinking mind, just to see clearly what is here. And that's the training. To see clearly what is here without assumptions. When I was 14, I read Stranger in a Strange Land. And there was one little story that just stuck out for me. It was one of these people who was trained in this form of paying attention. They were sitting behind a house and they saw there was a shed in the backyard. And he asked this person, "What color is that shed?" The person responded, "On this side, it's green." No assumption that the other side was green as well. And this is this element of strengthening the witness, strengthening your capacity to recognize what is here, observing without judgment. And you might just sense this just for a moment. We're going to take a 30-second pop quiz. If you like, you can close your eyes. If you're driving, please don't. And just sense or imagine for yourself what it means for you to take the seat of the witness. What do you notice? You might notice what are sometimes called the streams. The stream of sensation constantly changing. The stream of thoughts. The narrative. The stream of emotion. The stream of feeling tone. Even there's a stream of consciousness itself. Different states come and go. When you take this seat of the witness, you move from a predictive quality of mind to a mind that's open to new possibilities. So just yesterday, I was in the car. I saw a car going by really fast in the other direction. And then I saw a young deer that was hit by a car. And it had just happened because the other deer they were sniffing it. Like, what happened to Frank? I had such a feeling of sadness, just an overwhelming feeling of sadness. And then that sadness turned into anger to such stupid drivers. They don't realize they're here in the country where there are animals on the road all the time. And then that morphed into a belief. And I remember just thinking to myself, people are idiots. And then it didn't take too long when I thought, wait a minute, I've also hit deer. And I remembered how I've hit deer in the past. How they appeared right in front of the car before I could even take my foot off the gas. And the horror of what I had just done. The horror of watching a deer die, which I have witnessed a couple times. I grew up in deer country. And then I felt badly for the driver, for the deer and for the driver. I don't think that would have happened if I hadn't somehow, I'm not claiming credit for this, but somehow was able to stay present to my experience. I would have gotten locked into just feeling sad for the deer, or being locked in anger at city drivers out in the country, or locked in that belief that people are idiots. It all comes down to not believing what you think, and to look closer at what you believe. So I'd like to talk a little bit about deconstructing beliefs. We take on beliefs sort of osmotically. We see how people are living their lives, and we assume that's so too. And way back when I used to do a lot of fundraising, I would lead these workshops, and I would ask people to complete the following phrase. One thing my father always said about money was, they'd fill in the blank. And then I would ask, is that what you think? And for many people, gee, yeah, I guess I kind of absorbed that belief. So our life is constructed not only of thoughts, but it's a web of beliefs. When I was getting my master's degree, I went to a very exciting conference in Kansas City, of all places, the National Conference of Teachers of English conference. Thrilling. It was actually fun. My father was a university professor, and a colleague of my dad's was giving a paper. So I went to hear him read his paper, basically just reading his paper with a room full of other eggheads. And I was actually excited by his talk because I had read what he was writing about, and later that afternoon, I saw him on a street with another professor, and we had a kind of an animated talk. And I just really enjoyed making some connections with these two professors, and it's very stimulating, and I was pretty lit up. I mentioned to my father sometime later that I'd been to the conference. He said, yes, my colleague was there, and he noticed that when you after you had that conversation with the two of them, the other professor said to him, that young man is going places. I can't tell you the impact that had on me. Mark Twain once said, I can survive on a good compliment for a month. I kind of survived on that for a long time. I don't know why I internalized that so much. I guess I was desperate for some kind of affirmation, but I would sort of find myself spontaneously thinking, I'm a young man going places. Of course, he didn't specify what places I was going to, but I assumed those were really good places. Before that, I was just a schmuck doing the next thing, but now I'm a young man going somewhere. It's really interesting how our conditioning locks us in. If you take a bunch of fruit flies, put them in a mason jar, let them hang out there for a day or so, and then remove the top, they won't fly out. They'll stay in that confinement because their conditioning is locked in. So when it comes to beliefs, some beliefs are empowering. I'm a young man on his way somewhere. Some are not so empowering. They're crippling. The belief of I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. Some are diluted. Some beliefs are diluted. They just have nothing to do with reality. A good friend of mine was really upset that his 13-year-old was failing some classes and brought it up to her, and she looked at him with some pity and said, "Don't worry, Dad. It's okay. I'm going to be marrying a movie star." Yeah, that's a diluted thought, I think. She hasn't yet. So can you sense how your beliefs tend to form your reality? We have this classical image of a circle with a line through it. Above the line is what you're aware of. Below the line, everything you're not aware of, everything unseen, unfelt, undigested. When you relax and pay attention, the line moves and you begin to become more aware of everything unfelt, unseen, and undigested. So there are lots of systems for examining the deconstruction of beliefs. But there's a very popular and a very direct approach in the work of Byron Katie. If you're not familiar with Byron Katie and the work, it's very, very good. Great stuff. I encourage you to check out our website. You can see her work with people. There are all kinds of materials that will support you in this. In essence, it comes down to a few very, very challenging questions. As in mindfulness, the most simple things are usually the most powerful and directly challenging. When you find yourself caught in some kind of a complaint or in some form of anxiety or stress, you can ask yourself the following question. What am I believing right now? This is a simple question, and what I find is you really have to drill down. What's the core operative belief right now? It requires a tremendous amount of honesty. The second question to ask yourself when you have a sense of that belief is that true? Do I know that to be true? And here, it's important to kind of test it. Now, what I find quite often, I might be doing some exploration with someone and we'll kind of get to the core belief or what they think is the core belief. And the core belief might be something like, I'm not good enough. And I'll ask myself, is it true? And they'll say, well, the evidence sure points that direction. And then I have to persevere. And usually, inevitably, what I'll end up saying is, are you absolutely sure beyond a shadow of a doubt that that belief is 100% true? And with a little more reflection, they might be like, well, maybe not 100%, maybe 99.8%. That's all you need. A little bit of a crack in the wall. It may not be 100% true. The next question is a really courageous question, and we'll kind of go through this with an example, and I'll invite you to reflect on this. Is then to ask yourself, what is it like inside when I believe this? How do I show up when I believe this is true? And here it takes real courage to really drop inside, and here I also find that is very, very helpful to explore somatic investigations. So it's not just intellectual, but to really explore how does that belief live in your nervous system, and spend some time with it. Get to sense the tendrils of it. When you have a deep sense of that, you can then take out what I think of as the samurai sword and ask yourself this question: who am I without this thought? And then just listen. Now, this practice can sometimes provide a glimpse, just a sense for a moment who you are without that belief. And the practice goes on to explore doing a turnaround, which is to examine it and kind of lock that in a little bit more. So you can check that up. I just want to hang out with these questions here. It might be best if I give you a little example, and then I'll guide you through a little reflection. Oh boy, time is flying. I was in conversation and exploration with someone who just went through a very, very painful breakup. She hadn't been in a relationship for a really, really long time, found someone who she thought was a really, really good match, and really threw herself into the relationship, and it just dissolved over time. And she was devastated. And she wanted to kind of get under it a little bit. So as she described the situation and how it came to be, how it broke apart, obviously lots of feelings, lots of emotions, and I asked her to reflect. Could she begin to identify an operative core belief at the very root of this? And this takes time, it takes digging. Eventually she got to this belief: I will be alone forever. So I asked her if that was true. And she said, as I mentioned before, it sure looks that way. It's been that way so far. It looks like it's that way again. And then I asked, can you absolutely know that that is true? Beyond a shadow of a doubt. And she said, no, I can't know that for sure, but my God, it sure looks like it. So I asked her the following question: what's it like inside when you believe that thought? When you believe that's true? How does that live in your nervous system? And she began to describe this old place inside of just feeling lacking, of not deserving attention, affection, and love. And she could feel it in her heart and down in her belly, and there were lots of tears. When I asked her how old that feeling was, she couldn't even track how old it was. It just seemed like she came in with it. And there's lots of stuff around her bonding with her mother that didn't happen. And it's very, very powerful just to hang out there, and the courage to really explore, when I think that's true, how does that live in my nervous system? As she got in touch with just how deep that belief translated to her inner experience, I asked her the samurai sword question: who are you without that thought? And it was stunning. It was almost like a cognitive dissonance. And she said, I'd be free. I feel energy flowing again. I kept juices flowing. I feel like I could dance. I feel like I could express myself without worrying how I show up. I can just feel this charisma pouring off me. And it's quite powerful. And that's not to say that she didn't entertain that thought of I'll be alone forever again. But that glimpse of who you are without that thought, so powerful. So powerful. when the conditions are right for you to explore that inquiry, can be very, very helpful, very, very powerful. So we've just a little bit of time left, and I'd like to lead just a short little reflection, and then I've just a few words to say of like little cautionary words around deconstructing your world too fast. So if you like, you can close your eyes. Now, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to just have you play with a particular thought. So imagine that you're thinking to yourself, tomorrow is going to be a really hard day. Just take a moment and think that thought. And you might ask yourself, is that true? Do you know absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt that that thought is true? And just take a moment to imagine when you think that thought and you believe it, when you really believe that tomorrow is going to be a hard day, what's that like on the inside? Imagine you could describe the subtle feelings inside to someone as if they could recreate the same sensations. What do you feel and what do you notice? How does that thought, how does that belief affect your attitude, your behaviors? And then if you like, just take a moment. In regard to this thought that tomorrow is going to be a hard day, ask yourself the following question. Who am I without that thought? And just listen and feel. Who are you without that thought? If you like, you can open your eyes if they're not already. There's just a little dipping our toes into exploring what it means to investigate beliefs. And when you explore those really core beliefs, oh, I'm not enough, I'm not lovable, there's something wrong with me, all the thoughts that we inevitably take on to some degree, it's a very powerful process of deconstruction. I'd like to say just a little bit about that. There's a wonderful story, I think it's Basho, who said that a monk was talking with another monk and he started crying. And he said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "Last night I dreamed I was a butterfly." His friend said, That's a beautiful dream." And the other monk said, "Yes, but what if I'm really a butterfly dreaming I'm a man?" Sometimes when we begin to dismantle our core beliefs, it can be very powerful. I remember working with someone who was really exploring I'm not lovable. The whole story of family, intimacy, relationships, and we went deep into it. And when we got to that place where I asked her to explore, who are you without that thought? She literally fell out of her chair. It was such a profound reorganization of such a profound belief that she had locked in. Deconstructing our core beliefs can be incredibly powerful. When the Buddha said the following, "Nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine," it makes sense. Nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. When you drop into that, it's absolutely radical. Absolutely radical. And recently, I was in a recent very powerful conversation around what it means in practice to push and become too aggressive in that deconstruction of I and mine. And I think sometimes we do get too aggressive. We're so eager to kind of push through and break through that sometimes it can be very disquieting, to say the least. And more, I find it important in my own practice to move with care. That when I come up to something that feels scary or unsafe in my practice, whether it be simply in meditation or in some form of inquiry, when I feel like I'm really in touch with something that's got me right at that place of, this is hard, this is scary, I really encourage you to ask yourself, does it feel okay to be with this a little bit longer? And then listen to your body. Your body will tell you. Sometimes just asking that question is enough. Sometimes you may get a sense of like, this is a little too hot, this is a little too much. And if you do have that sense, it is so skillful. Let it know you see it. Let it know another time when the conditions are a little bit different. Maybe you have more energy, more mindfulness, more concentration, or maybe some assistance. Your intention is to be with it. But in the meantime, to shift your attention elsewhere. There are levels of this practice that are incredibly healing. And there's no question about it. There are also aspects of this practice that will inevitably present to you everything that's undigested in your life. Sometimes you can sense an innate gentle intelligence bringing it forward. Sometimes it can feel like it's too much. And particularly in this day and age where there's so much overstimulation, so much trauma, I find it's really helpful to err on the side of safety and to trust that as you walk this path, everything you need will arise. And at the same time, to really continue to ask yourself, what am I experiencing right now? Can I be with this? And really listen deeply to that. Thank you so much. So many blessings in your practice. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to being with you again sometime down the road. Happy trails.